My guest today is Nico Santana, a creative specialist and COO of Leading Giants, a business education and tech solutions company. Nico is unique in the fact that he has over a decade of media and marketing experience, but he is also a well-versed music creator too. He's toured the US, Canada, South America, and converges his love of media and business, sharing both what he's learned through the success and failures, as well as documenting his own journey on social media. And that's exactly what we're going to get into in today's conversation. Enjoy the episode. Nico Santana, thank you so much for being here with me today. How are you doing, buddy?
Good, man. Happy to be here. It's been a while since we've talked to you and I, so I definitely have a lot of questions for you, but I'm just excited to be a part of this amazing podcast that you've created.
Dude, I'm excited too. Let's dive into it. You've got many highlights coming your way. We've been friends for a few years. We often check in and kind of like talk shop, but also just kind of catch each other up with where we're at in our creative endeavors as well as business, and kind of just check on each other as friends. I'm happy to say you're one of my mentors as well. You've definitely influenced me in a lot of like my career pathways and roadmaps, but also you're just one of the most, I think, at least from what I see on Instagram and when we talk, one of the most driven people. You're always up at the crack of dawn. You're always finding time for family, working out, getaways, but then also it seems like you're on business 24/7. So with today's podcast being shot, I was like making sure that I was up at the crack of dawn. I was in my like, how would Nico live this day thing. I'm on my grind today. But yeah, you've had loads of highlights, and there's some lowlights trickled in there as well. Before we get started, please plug and promote anything that you want our audience to check out.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've kind of put my personal brand on hiatus. So I've had a podcast that I've run for, I think, about 2.5 years called the Musicpreneur Podcast. You can check that out on my YouTube channel, Nico Santana. Right now, I'm mostly focused on kind of just sharing bits and pieces of where I am journey-wise on my Instagram, nicosantana.co. I'm kind of planning a resurgence, so to speak, on my socials here in the next coming months with just my process of how I went from creative to what I would classify as creative entrepreneur, so kind of an entrepreneur, but with an opportunity to, kind of work in-house for a company that I'm helping build out. So that's exciting. So I would say if you want to find out a little bit more about me and what I got going on, nicosantana.co is the place to go for my socials, Instagram specifically.
I don't think we've spoken too much about kind of the early chapters of your life. So this is going to be as interesting for me as it is our audience. But do you want to tell us a little bit about where you grew up and kind of your move to America?
Sure. So it's funny because I repeat this story every time I get an opportunity to be in a podcast. And so it's kind of cool to just refine it and reshape it and resynthesize it. But I was born in Colombia. The capital city is Bogota in the early 1990s, so 1991 specifically. This was towards the tail end of the Escobar era. And so you had a lot of what was once the structured Medellin cartel that ran kind of the cocaine distribution, much like a Fortune 100 company, was practically dispersed, meaning that there was a free for all for any cartel and criminal organization in the country. So effectively, we were in decades long civil war with kind of the socialist group that is trying to overtake the government, which is the FARC. And then you had the cartels that were kind of infighting and trying to take over the business that Medellin cartel was no longer handling. And so you had that going on, and you had a lot of political corruption as well, just nature of the game with most countries in South America. So socioeconomically and culturally speaking, it was a hellhole, for lack of a better term. I love Colombia. Anybody that you hear come from Colombia says they have such a passion and love for the country, for the roots, for the culture, for the food, for the music, all beautiful things. And unfortunately, what comes out is narcs and all the negative aspects of the country. So I'm highlighting that not to say that that's what is the embodiment of our culture, but just to showcase where I was coming from: tumultuous violence, not a lot of safety. And the reason why my parents decided to move to United States, where my grandmother, my mom's mom, was living at the time. And so, as effectively you would refer to most people in that situation as refugees, we came to the country, to the United States specifically, um, seeking, refuge, for lack of a better term. But my upbringing was vibrant in the sense of, I got to experience all the sights, sounds, and tastes of a rich Colombian culture. We go back every now and again, so I love going back and visiting my family there. And we came here, like I said, to seek a better future, safety predominantly, right? Higher education was another aspect of it too. So all those things followed me through, you know, being a young 7-year-old, fresh, off the plane, coming to South Florida, Southeast Florida at that, and trying to get acquainted with the American culture, which is not a huge culture shock considering the fact that my wife is Indian. So you have a bigger culture shock there from India to the United States. But it was enough of a culture shock for me to, you know, um, feel like I was an outsider and effectively felt like an outsider for much of my upbringing here.
Mm.
Um, a little bit of a different take on kind of the genesis story of Nico Santana, so to speak. But there's a lot involved there with music as well. Like I said, in Colombia and then coming here, that kind of bridged the gap culturally for me, where I found a sense of belonging in hip hop culture as a whole. I felt like there were disenfranchised, violent people that came from violent communities, not safe, and they were trying to make their life better, right? Whether or not you agree with the messaging, that's up for debate. But they were coming from that and trying to make something out of nothing. And so that resonated with me. And at an early age, I fell in love with hip hop. And even though I was academically inclined, I always felt like I wanted to do something music wise. And that kind of took its path and led me down a road of music creation as a teen.
Were you the driven Nico that I know now in school, or was there some kind of like course correction change there?
It's funny because my parents reminded me of this morning. They're here for the weekend, helping out. I have three
Awesome.
kids, and so life is crazy. So they'll come and help out every now and again. But I woke my son up this morning, like 6:45 a.m., and he got ready for school and all that stuff. And they reminded me, they're like, "Man, it's so crazy how your son has it, because when you were that age, we'd have to wake you up at 5 in the morning, shower, get ready for an hour long bus ride to get to school by 7 in the morning. And then I'd have, my schooling, and then I'd have after school activities, and I'd have to, get back home via bus as well. And I could take an hour, hour and a half. And, I'd be home around 3:30, 4 o'clock, do homework, eat dinner, and be in bed by 7 p.m. That was kind of the structure as a 5 and 6-year-old in Colombia, right?
Right.
So when I came here, everything was so lax. It felt like, to a degree, a fresh of breath air. Did I say that right?
Breath of fresh air.
Breath of fresh air. There we go.
You got it.
I still haven't. The coffee hasn't kicked in yet. But I think because of that structure, that discipline that I came from, it was easier to advance and excel. Now, mind you, I knew early on that we didn't have the best of circumstances, so I felt like what's the word? Necessity is the mother of all invention, right? So I felt like I needed to be driven for the sake of accomplishing the things that would benefit my family then, which is my parents and my sister. Now, my wife and my kids, right? So there was always that degree of being driven. I think a lot of it is genetic too. Like my grandfather was a very successful entrepreneur in Colombia. He started a company from scratch, and led it to multiple millions of dollars in revenue every single year.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so I've kind of thought about, what are my drivers? Why am I the way that I am? And I realize that some of it is genetic, some of it is just temperament, and some of it is environmental. So I would say those three things. But definitely being a father and a husband has put that pressure of, okay, I have to provide, I'm responsible. There's an accountability factor there that some people don't get to experience. And innately, I think like that pushes me beyond the natural tendency that I already have to be persistent and driven and that sort of thing.
Is music, because music is coming your way as a predominant chapters of your book.
Mhm.
Is it playing a part at this point? Are you dabbling in writing, making music, or have you not got to that stage yet?
I picked up the guitar at 9 years old, and
Mhm.
that was kind of my first introduction to anything music related.
Mhm.
I never got good at it. I just liked it. So
Mhm.
I kind of just stagnated after like the first year and kind of just kept the basics there. But I always had an interest in music. It always appealed to me. I think now looking back and understanding kind of how classical studies are structured, a lot of it had to do with my own inclination towards math, geometry, and just the way
Is
that
that right?
uh,
Wow.
yeah. So the way that I understand it, and feel free to anyone who's watching this or listening to this, correct me if I'm wrong, but music is are numbers in time and space, right? So numbers are effectively geometry, algebra, that sort of thing. And then you have numbers in space, which is astronomy. And then you have numbers in time and space, which is music.
Mhm.
And so I always found that kind of interesting. But yeah, I always had a natural inclination towards like music because of that, rhythms and that sort of thing. So by the time I was 9, I picked up a guitar, and then progressively, that coupled with my own interest in writing, I was always fascinated with writing little short stories. I always excelled in school in that capacity, and then getting introduced to hip hop at around the same age. I felt that it was just a natural progression to eventually want to, become a songwriter to a degree, right? But then
Mhm.
eventually it was like, well, I can't really sing. My voice is not as it's not up to par. So the next best thing was, because I loved hip hop, was to start writing hip hop songs.
It's so funny that you mentioned about the time and space thing, because guitar was my first instrument that I gravitated towards. And we've had this conversation
Mhm,
before. We both had
mhm,
teeny tiny fingers. We just couldn't figure out the chord shapes.
uh-huh,
And then it was drums. I think it was drums after that. I'd like maybe dabbled at a few other instruments. And when I figured out that rhythm thing, that magic, like I hit this thing at the right time and that is on
mhm,
beat. If I hit it in the wrong time, that is off beat. And I could figure out these grooves by just working out the time, just hit like real Neanderthal way of playing, like hit this thing at this time, you're good. And then I could take
yeah,
that to other instruments. So the piano was the next instrument many, many years
mhm,
later, where I was like, okay, in my head, not that different to drums. Instead of skins and, pedals and things like that, I've just got these keys, hit that thing at the right time. It's not like singing. I've always struggled with singing because there's
mhm,
something magical about singing where I have to imagine that note and hit it, and it's all within me somewhere. And there's
mhm,
definitely techniques and practice and ways that you can attune that. But with the keys, it was like, okay, hit this thing in time. And then that went full circle to any other instrument or any other tactile instrument. It was like, okay, just imagine it like hit this thing in time. Guitar Hero, blue, green, red, I'm golden. And it's funny that
mhm,
like probably you, I, and a million other people had that discovery as well of like, okay, rhythm, mathematics, time and space. Where does this
mhm,
fit into this? And how many formulas are this? Oh, sorry, how many formulas are there to this? Where we just combine that with other rhythmic time and space instruments to build a song. It's hilarious that we kind
yeah.
of both come to that conclusion. And then so you're at school, super academic, paving your way. Do you get a job in school? Are you doing a paper round? Anything like that? What does the first job for you look like in America?
I would join my dad in a couple odd jobs here and there, like whether it was landscaping or that's the only specific job that I remember doing with him. But I know I did like little jobs here and there. Eventually, by the time I was 14, I got a formal job. I was helping out at a restaurant on the weekends, and my goal there was to save enough money to buy my first car. So that was kind of my first introduction to a formal, structured work environment. And then I kept that job for, I don't know, 2, 3 years. Eventually I went into retail. So I worked at I say this jokingly now because back then it wasn't as welcoming to people that, like myself, Abercrombie and Fitch. It was
Hmm.
super like, I don't know, not posh. I don't think posh is the right word, but kind of, preppy. And I just wasn't that at all.
Right.
So I remember I had to, I couldn't afford the jeans that I had to wear to work. So I had to buy them off eBay, like super used Abercrombie
They wouldn't
jeans.
even
And like,
supply them for you.
no, I had to buy
Wow.
them. I got a discount, but even with the discount, I'm like, I still can't afford this
Right,
stuff.
killer. Thanks, guys.
But it was a nice change of pace because at the restaurant I came out smelling like food for the next day and a half. Here I came out smelling like cologne for the next day and a half. So
Perfect.
it was nicer for sure. But all the while, I always developed skills that eventually I could sell. So even at a 16, 17-year old Nico, I would sell like graphic design and MySpace templates back in the day. I would figure out
Wow.
how to do stuff like that. I even started selling my own mixtapes in high school, which is kind of funny. So I did that route.
Let me interject real quick because this is
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
But how are you selling MySpace designs to people? Is it like, I can see you don't know your way around, finding the codes from these websites. I can get this done for you. Are you building? Are you coding them? How do you approach another like teenager and go, let me sell your MySpace design?
Well, it's funny because I've never been good at outbound sales. Like I just haven't had that confidence
Sure.
in me. So I naturally lean more towards being introverted than I do extroverted.
Mm,
But I my work kind of just showcased my ability to do something great. And so at that time, I was so into graphic design and like coding there were GIFs, so it
that's
looked
it.
like
Yeah.
the picture was moving, and that was revolutionary at the time. Not a lot of people knew how to do those, but I figured it out, and through YouTube, ironically.
Of course.
Um, this is back in like 2007, 2008,
Right.
and one of the guys that I worked with at the restaurant, like I would show him my MySpace, and he's like, "Can you do like I'm a producer? Can you design one for me?" And so he paid me to like redesign his entire MySpace. So it was like one or two clients at the time that it
Sure.
just happened to be like a conversation that I'd struck with them and showed them my stuff, and they were like really impressed by it. But that's how that came about.
Wow. And then you said you were working in the restaurant, which is crazy. Survived, like, what was it? How long was it? 2 or 3 years that you were there?
Yeah, about 2, 3 years. Yeah.
How important is service work and working with the public to you? Is that something that you hold in like high value that gave you a lot of lessons, or not so much?
I would say so. I mean, my first job uh, was a blessing in the sense of I had a clear direction. I knew that I needed to save X amount of money. So until I got to that place, I wasn't going to quit.
Mm,
It was a mom and pop cafe, breakfast cafe. So it was pretty chill, so to speak. I mean, you always have difficult customers, but like the environment there was pretty good. And then I had my best friend at the time who worked alongside me, and so
oh, that's ideal.
we would, yeah, we would crack jokes and have fun. So environment wise, it was ideal for someone my age.
Mm,
You learn a lot of lessons in sticking to something that is challenging and difficult, because life is challenging and difficult. Like no job is perfect. Even your dream career is going to have its setbacks, is going to have its issues, is going to have the things that like you don't like about it. So if you build this tolerance to or intolerance to difficult work, and while I agree, I think it is important to quit things that you're not necessarily that aren't helpful for you long term. I think also building in that grit of like understanding like sticking to things when they are difficult, I think is important.
mm,
To a degree, everything is service based. Even like most tech jobs, you have to answer to someone, or whether it's a client or a customer or a manager or boss or a business partner. There's going to be that human element to it. And so learning to work with others who have different opinions, different temperaments, different styles of working, I think that a lot of that can be shaped when you're on the side of being of delivering some sort of service to a customer, right? And a restaurant's a perfect place to see kind of people at their worst and learn to deal with it and grow through that. So
mm.
yeah, I think it's important.
If we can sort of fast forward a little bit, you were you kind of go through those jobs, you leave school. Is it right, and correct me if I'm wrong, you find yourself in a position, a job where it becomes kind of like a for lack of a better term, like a pseudo cult, or no?
Mhm. Yeah. So early on in college, when I had kind of my first experience of living on my own, I was, fresh 18-year-old, I would say kid, because I was really a kid, um, living in an apartment, doing my own, it's funny to say, grocery shopping. There's plenty of people who have done this at earlier ages, but this was kind of my first introduction to that. I found myself trying to figure out and identify myself, not in the way that was related to who my family is, my parents specifically, but who I am outside of that. Like now it's time to take ownership for what I will do, not just career wise, but who I am, who I'm becoming, and that sort of thing. So I set the stage there because for me, my faith, my religion had played an integral part in my upbringing, and it was the first time I was challenged with, do I go down this path or not? And after kind of a brief stint of not, I was like, you know what? I feel like I'm a better person if I do. And in that process, I had to detangle a lot of things that I felt were hindering me from my ability to grow and to really develop as a human being, not just somebody who's religious, but like just as a person, like being a good person. And in that process, I looked for mentors outside of my parents, just people who would guide me along the way. And unfortunately, it came to pass where I was kind of in a tumultuous back and forth with different type of relationships at the time. College is just kind of, you're discovering yourself and then trying to discover yourself. You're not really fully who you are supposed to be, and then you introduce somebody else who's like not fully who they're supposed to be.
Hmm.
And I had a lot of back and forth trying to just understand um, those dynamics in a relationship. And so I was looking for the guidance of another, older guy, somebody who had more experience than me and effectively a mentor. And this person so happened to have been kind of the freshest person in the church. He was a music minister, so I related to him on the music level.
Okay.
He's just super talented vocalist, pianist, and um, had a way with people, like just a natural charismatic person. And so there were a few of my friends were friends with him, and so I was like, all right, maybe I'll talk to him about my own things. And he was kind of what you would call a spiritual director, so a
Mhm.
mentor, so to speak. And I started talking to him pretty regularly and kind of just opening up, myself in the sense of like, hey, this is what I'm going through. These are my struggles, da, 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 whatever. So if you think about it, somebody with manipulative bend or narcissistic personality disorder, in his case, he was also, attracted to men, which I wasn't aware of. It wasn't something that it didn't matter to me. It was just something that he never disclosed, right?
Mm.
Um, yeah, and he was much older than I was, so I had my guesses, but I never really wanted to presume or categorize a person based off of their sexual preferences. I was
Mm.
just like, this is a great guy, like whatever. But all those things combined lent themselves to him building a kind of a pseudo organization that was never an official organization. So I want to state that clearly. It was never official organization, meaning like it never had any sort of approval from any authority, institution, that sort of thing. Um, that was effectively a cult of personality organization, meaning people followed because he just had a great personality, great charisma with music and that sort of thing. And we were trying to revolutionize, quote unquote, the church landscape by way of music, right? Which to me, I'm like, hey, that's a great mission. I wanna
Mhm.
I wanna play a part in it. But behind the scenes, there were so many issues. He talked down to people a lot. He started talking down to me a lot. He made me feel less than. He started making me believe that I had to cut off friendships and relationships so that I could focus fully on the mission that was at hand. It started to have a lot of the inner workings of a cult more than it did of a healthy organization. And then one thing led to another, and he kind of just started to spiral even more, using and abusing alcohol and introducing drugs and that sort of
Wow.
thing. I never partook, but I realized that like, man, this guy's not healthy. And even with my own cracked frame of reference at, a young 20, 21 year old, 21 years of age, I realized that, like, okay, if I don't take the lead in this organization, this thing's going to crumble. And so I put that weight of the world on my back,
Wow.
and started to try to lead this organization in a healthy way. And I know I'm making this long story long, but he effectively, came out to me and said that he was very attracted to me. And after putting me in a corner and isolating me from my friends, and like kind of, you know becoming my boss, my mentor, my you know my leader, so to speak, which sounds weird saying. uh the next step was like he wanted to be my partner, and I'm like, well, first of all, I'm not attracted to men. It's just not something I'm not attracted to men. Second of all, like, that's not why I came here for. I came here to start an organization. And third of all, some of the advancements were just sexual harassment. I mean, even within the company setting, even if it was, two parties that were attracted to that particular gender, meaning like male and female, if they're attracted to each other, like, you would still see it as sexual harassment if an advancement was unwarranted upon. And so in my case, I was like, dude, like, no, no, no. And so the place where I worked, the place that gave me housing, the place that gave me transportation, the place that gave me a potential future was no longer going to be the thing for me. And I realized I had to cut all ties. And that little, what you would call a ministry, disintegrated in like 6 months after I left, because there was so much financial mishaps. And it was just not only from the health of the organization, like emotionally and, from a human resource perspective, but even financially, like, he was doing all sorts of weird stuff with people's money, because people were donating to that organization. I mean, I never felt comfortable with him getting drunk off of donation money,
Mm.
or, like, especially with the type of organization that it was. Now, I got drunk plenty of times after that. So, but it was money that I worked
Yeah.
for, and I didn't feel any sort of, but if people are donating, or, money to a cause, and you're using that to get drunk and high over the weekend, like, I don't know, there's something doesn't sit right with
The
me. But
priorities are
yeah, that's kind of,
misaligned.
yeah, exactly. So that's kind of the inner workings of that. And I found that not a lot of people could relate to that story. So I like to share that story, because there may be, some people that have come up through some sort of religious organization or church or whatever, and it kind of took a negative bend.
Mm.
But I've come out on the other side, what I would say, by the grace of God, still having a good relationship with my local church community, still having a good relationship with, in my faith life and in my personal walk with God. And it's still a very important part of my life. But it's taken like 10 plus years to heal from, through therapy and a lot of other, counseling and that sort of thing.
If I may touch upon that kind of small or huge, actually, the space of 10 years, speed bump that you had, what does coming out of that organization look like? Do you have a crisis of faith? Do you have a crisis of where do my priorities lean in terms of career? And obviously therapy is a big one, but what other kind of roadmaps do you put in place to try and find yourself and be comfortable again, whether it be in relationships, jobs, or all of those things?
Yeah, I had taken kind of a vow of celibacy during that time. So I wasn't dating, I wasn't doing any of that. So on the one hand, it was like, okay, well, eventually I'd like to get married. So it'd be nice to start dating again. But to your point, I had this, this crisis of identity. I felt like my self-worth had been plummeted. I was a very confident individual. Some people would say arrogant in college. I was kind of cocky because I'm a rapper. I'm like doing my music thing, and then I go through this ordeal, and like my confidence is through the floor. Career wise, I had no prospects. I couldn't find work. It was, towards the tail end of the financial crisis. This is like 2013. So finding work in my space, which is specifically in marketing, was just very difficult to come across for someone who was entry level, and all my work experience was in the church. So yeah, relationally, financially, career wise, emotionally, psychologically rather, there was just a lot of, it was hard. And I think for a lot of us creatives, because we have a natural tendency to be like empaths, I think we feel things deeper, and we don't give ourselves the opportunity to process hurts in the right way. And then we
Mm,
create music and content out of that space. And inadvertently, while we use that as therapy, we can project a what seems to be a good, meaning that like, oh, I'm, talking about my hurts and wounds and that sort of thing, but it's coming from a place that is not healthy. And I think, in my opinion, and it's my belief that when you do that and you come from a wounded place, your music could potentially project that hurt to other people and further add to it rather than help.
absolutely. I think you touched upon a great point of course, therapy, speaking to individuals, like, what we're doing, just communicating with people about these circumstances, whether you find it, through, community relationships, friends, colleagues, or through art is huge. I definitely, not to quite a detrimental degree, but found myself almost excited at times when I was younger, when I was in a crummy situation. We've spoken about this, and I'm sure we'll get onto this, like anxiety, depression. That's played a huge part of my life over the years, and I dip in and out of. And sometimes when I would be in that depressive, darker place, even those closer to me would say, it seems like you're almost comfortable in that place. And
Mm,
I kind of knew, quote unquote, thought at that time when I was younger, like, this is great. Like, I'm at the bottom, and this is where I create all of my best pieces of art, because I thought
mhm,
I could reach into that bucket and I could make these kind of like woe is me sad songs, and I was able to sell that material rather than, you know, painting stories from a happy place, and you can still create, things that
mhm.
touch on mental health or darker imagery, as well as create songs that are in a major key and that are just nicer all around. I definitely found myself kind of leaning on that crutch of like sadness and kind of like I said, depression and anxiety. And it's massively important to have to talk to people and seek out help,
Mhm.
and know when you're there. Let's fast forward again. When does music start playing a more major role in your life?
So throughout college, I had an opportunity to work with groups and producers, and so this was around the time that I started posting. Actually, even in high school, I started posting my music on YouTube before there was such an influx of artists that oversaturated kind of the platform. But because of that, I got in early, so there was a lot of organic exposure. I got into a niche part of the hip hop world, which is like a subgenre of a subgenre. And so I found a lot of like-minded individuals. We started touring and making music collectively through this group called Foundation. And it was fun. In fact, that's one of the reasons why I joined that ministry and towards the tail end of college. One, because I didn't have a prospect in terms of job, but two, because the promise was that I would still be able to do that while having some sort of stability with housing and income and being plugged into a community. So to me, music continued from high school through college. And then in the time of that kind of coming out of that situation of trying to find my identity again, I put out a lot of music. I was just trying to have some sort of semblance of normalcy. Um, and yeah, it just continued. I ended up getting, a couple jobs just to, make do with what I had and try to one step forward, right?
Hmm.
Move ahead in life. Um, Sales and marketing was kind of the thing that I was trying to get into, but on the nights and weekends, I would still record and ended up working at a recording studio for a short time frame that helped me out a lot with like my audio engineering skills. And my goal then, this was back in 2014, 2013, was to make music my full-time income, tour independently, sell records, sell merch, and just structure my business in a way where effectively, I mean, if you look at any sort of e-commerce business, it has a digital component and it has, some sort of potentially material component, meaning like you're selling a physical product. So I was learning a lot of what effectively would become entrepreneurship without really knowing that that's exactly what I was doing. And that kind of became the catalyst for what was to come.
Wow. And speaking on, you know, selling records, you've always been a hustler. Um, Fast forward a couple years, you release a track called Limits the Sky, and that goes on to today stream over 33 million times. How does that make you feel at the time? What does it make you feel now in the position that you're at? Um, you know, kind of as a reflection of what you do now.
Yeah, that's a great question, Will. I think for me at the time, it's funny because so this record we produced, and I say we because it was a collective of us. So it was two producers and two artists, including myself. Um, I had been approached by a acquaintance, a connection of an acquaintance, who was a producer out in Houston, Texas, MPAX. And the at the time, this was 2018, 2019. I'd gotten married. My wife and I had our first child. So I was really trying to get serious about music, and I had rebranded. I used to go by the moniker Diverse. Had changed to Nico Santana, which is kind of just a abbreviation of my full government name, as you would say. Um, and so 2016, that was around the time I did that. So I was really trying to get serious. I was trying to really get signed because I felt like that would allow me the opportunity to get kind of a influx of cash and stability to be able to focus on music full time and then eventually go the independent route again. So kind of like the Russ model to a degree, like where he partnered with it. It was like Capital, maybe. I don't know. But so anyways, so I things weren't really working out there. I linked up with this producer. He's like, hey man, like I'm really interested in working with you. I heard some of your stuff. Um, you know, I want to create a catalog of songs that we can license to, for TV and movies and commercials and that sort of thing. I'm working with a couple of other artists. Do you want to join me? And I was like, yeah, sure, let's do it. You know, I had some, I still had the desire to make music a full time thing, and I thought maybe this is the way that I'll do it. Um, we were working mostly on Spanish music, and like Latin pop and reggaeton and that sort of thing. And I had kind of made the pivot from hip hop to that because I felt like it had more marketability, especially for how I looked and who I was and kind of just my heritage. So I thought that would be the best business move. And ironically, the song that you're referring to, Limits the Sky, was a hip hop song. And he had pitched it to me. He said, hey, man, I'm working on this with this other artist. We just can't seem to find the right feel for the hook. Do you want to give it a shot? And it was in English too. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. So that naturally came easier to me. So I wrote and recorded about 3 variations of the hook. Mind you, I'm not a good vocalist at all, but had a little help from autotune. And so I wrote it, recorded it, we refined it, and we put it out in 2019, not thinking much of it. I'm just thinking like, all right, we'll put out the song, whatever. Fast forward, I think a year or two, and it was an uplifting song. It was a positive song. This is the pandemic. And for some reason or another, it started getting picked up on TikTok by just different TikTok creators. And one thing leads to another. We didn't discover this until after the fact because the stream count started like slowly going up. We never spent any money on marketing or videos or anything like that. We're like, what's going on? So we look into it, and that's how we find out that it's slowly blowing up on TikTok. And it was just kind of like right place, right time, catching lightning in a bottle. It wasn't something that we planned for or strategically positioned to be this thing. It just so happened, which is kind of the frustrating side of this because it's like it blew up to have over 33 million streams, the equivalent of that. Over I was checking the stats, over 78 million. I think it was like either 78 million or 198 million views. I have to check on my stat dashboard there, views on TikTok, but it racked up a ton of content views and listens. But because it was something of the effect of like right place, right time, it's harder to replicate that stuff, and you become a one-hit wonder, right? Now we've talked about doing some songs similar to that in style and nature, and maybe we could potentially replicate the same success of that song. Who knows? But because I went back to the Spanish music stuff, right after that, it's hard to say whether or not we would have had the same success. So yeah, it was cool to see a song blow up for the first time to that degree. But the frustrating part was because it wasn't something that we could easily replicate, or maybe we could have. I don't know. I don't want to put myself in a limiting belief, but we didn't follow through with that, and it just kind of became a one-hit wonder.
And at that point, that's like 2019, 2020. You're already working within sales and marketing. Is that correct?
So, formal career-wise, I would say, back in 2014, when I was looking for jobs and stuff like that, I had worked in sales, I had worked in marketing, I had clients freelance as a sales and marketing guy, graphic design, videography, and the like. I decided to move to Tampa, so about 3.5 hours away from where I was raised, and I had been living with my parents after that whole fallout with that organization that was like a cult. So I'd lived with them for about a year. Effectively, I met my now wife, re-met, because we knew each other in college. And she was like, "Hey, I'm moving to Tampa. I'm working there." Da, da, da. She had her life together. I felt like I didn't. So I was like, "Yeah, this seems like a great opportunity." I had a buddy of mine who I worked on music with here in Tampa. I asked him where he worked, and we had talked about me joining his organization, his company. I applied, and eventually I got a customer service job. It was a call center job, and I was like, "Cool." Gives me enough of an opportunity to move to Tampa, work on music with him, court my now wife, and let's do it, So for about 6.5 years, I was working kind of like this. I don't want to downgrade anybody who works in this capacity, but it was like a low-level call center job. And I knew I had to get out. Either I had to make music, work out, or I had to pivot careers altogether. But I lasted there for about 6.5 years before my actual career outside of music completely skyrocketed. And so, yeah, that's what I was doing at that time, full time. And then nights and weekends I was dedicating to music. But in 2019, ironically, when we recorded this song, I kind of had, another identity crisis, because I had never worked through a lot of the issues that I had from that organization. And so it was easy for me to associate myself with the identity that I had created online with this Nico Santana character, Latin pop artist trying to be the next J Balvin, Daddy Yankee, that sort of thing. That it was starting to seep into my marriage and create cracks in the foundation there. And, as somebody who's married, who's got a kid, to continue to act in a way that is not consistent with that online, it created a lot of dissonance in my relationship. And so I knew that I had to part ways with that if I was going to keep my marriage afloat. And so 2019, I decided to shut off my social media for some time. In fact, I deleted my old Instagram account, my old Facebook account. I actually wiped them out completely. And I started afresh in 2020 with kind of a new content strategy and content plan. And that's around the time that I started working with DistroKid as well. So kind of worked out.
Speaking of DistroKid, Nico has an affiliate link in the description, which you can use to get 7% off your first year. Both of us use DistroKid to release all of our musical endeavors, and they make it almost effortless to ensure that your music is on all of the available streaming platforms. To find out more, visit the link in the description. Enjoy the rest of the episode. So the time that we meet and we become friends, that's when you come back online and you're almost rebranding yourself as your truer identity. Was that, just to skip back and kind of rehash that a little bit and get a better understanding of that, did you have a realization that you were kind of maybe, again, correct me if I'm wrong, are you lying to yourself and you're trying to put forward this persona and be like, I am a rapper, I am living this life, when really in the back of your head, and your family are telling you who is this guy? Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the image that I was portraying online is, full circle, I guess. When I was trying to be a rapper before I found my faith, I was trying to put this persona of this, super overconfident, tough guy. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm not that. So then when I went to the faith-based stuff, it was easier for me to be who I was. But then when I made the transition to Latin pop, I was like, all right, I gotta take the best of all of these guys that I see are at the top and try to aggregate it and make this persona, kind of like a Lady Gaga type of thing, right? Where she's not Lady Gaga in real life. She is, I forgot her name, but that is not who she is in real life. It's just a persona, right? Same thing with Sasha Fierce and, Childish Gambino. It's a facade, for lack of a better term, for personal branding purposes and to get somebody to be palatable enough for marketing. So I understood that framework, but when acting, when the person that you're acting to be on on for the sake of personal branding as a musician starts to seep into kind of like Drake, right? Perfect example. Starts to seep into your personal life, and it's really not who you are. People can start to pick that apart, whether it's your close friends and family or eventually the public, as we've seen with the latest display of Kendrick and Drake. And so I came across that fork in the road because of the fact that the dissonance was so clear and evident within my family, and I needed to be, the rock and kind of a stable force for my family, because my wife was going through her own stuff as well, and we it just wasn't conducive to a healthy marriage. That I knew I needed to put it down and just be who I genuinely was, which is kind of a nerdy, shy, like jack of all trades, kind of master of none type of character who likes to geek out about certain things and is kind of a nerd. It's quiet, shy to a degree, and struggles with vulnerability, but like can put it on a song, and uh, really just wants to be approachable and approached within a kind way and be kind to others. And so I don't think I was giving off that with my music then. And so when I started doing that through people like you and my buddy Ivan and Daniel from DistroKid, basically complete strangers to a degree at that time, that gave me kind of a fresh start. It became easier to do that online, and that's what I did. And so it just kind of has been the same framework that I followed since then.
Can we talk about the idea of purpose and kind of the anxieties that go into finding that career path? Because you've been someone in my eyes that has never really shied away from course correcting and finding new avenues in their professional life. How do you go about making a decision when the road ahead is possibly undetermined?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the nature of being a creative and an entrepreneur, right? Like it's, those go hand in hand. And again, it's my belief in my limited experience, that, as a creative, you have the tools to just make the decision for the day in hopes that you can get to where you want to get to tomorrow. And I think a lot of us make the mistake of projecting too far out with our imagination, which is what causes anxiety. But also neglecting the warning signs that we're going down the wrong path because we're so emotionally attached to our work and our creative output that it can lend itself to being back in that detrimental place. And so, for example, like I knew I had to lay music down because also like I wasn't earning what I needed to earn to make even just a sustainable living with my music, period. Right. And I realized at that time that my goal with music, if it was to be making a living off of it, I had to have a certain income level for at least to cover my basic expenses. And then from there, I could grow it as a business so that I could have profit and continue to grow it and that sort of thing. Right. Um, Most creatives that I've spoken to, which is a very small sample size, don't think in those terms, right? They think of this is fun, this is cool, I enjoy it, I like the validation from my audiences. This is lit. But if we sat back and thought, okay, will this thing be here in the next 10 years for me? And if there's a slight chance that it is, cool, keep doing it. But if you're not even certain that it'll be here tomorrow, then why keep doing the thing that is not going to help you out tomorrow or the next day? And more importantly, going back to that guilt question, like for me, like my income, I don't plan to, I mean, granted, there's times where I use it self-indulgently, but like my goals financially are so that I can help other people, starting with my family. There's a couple, friends of mine that I know could use like somebody like me in their corner, right? For their own ventures and that sort of thing. So, money is only good for the good that it does. And when it starts to become an idol and an object of pursuit rather than a tool, that's when it can go awry. Um, I think I'm forgetting your question here as I'm talking a lot, so forgive me. Um, but yeah, the personal branding side of things, I think, can be anxiety inducing, if it becomes the end and not the means to the end, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I think you mentioned, you said such a great quote there, which is something I mentioned to my Discord recently in terms of someone had asked a question on the Discord. I'm forgetting their username, apologies, but they said, how do you deal with the feelings of putting in tens of hours? Some people spend weeks, months, years finishing a track. You put it out and it doesn't get the streams that you want. And you mentioned a very similar quote that I've written down, which is something that I reply to this user: projecting too far out causes anxiety. And you have to be honest with yourself at every kind of every integer of like, am I working as hard as I say I'm working? Am I doing the things that I say I am doing? Are the things that I'm currently working on, whether they seem lavish or exciting on Instagram or any social media, are they actually adding value not only to my life today, but tomorrow, next week, next month, next year? Is this all building towards something? I had a part two to that question that I asked you, which is, how do you make sure that you see that plan that you have, that career-based plan that you have, how do you see it through to fruition when you're at kind of that starting point? You know, you've got a family to care for, you've got bills to pay, debts, that kind of thing. Is there any kind of roadmap that you have in your mind for like, these are the particular goals that I have to meet?
Yeah, it's interesting. To your point, I think as a creative, you have to build the business of today and tomorrow simultaneously. So I think like you have to do the work that is involved in doing what you're supposed to do today, also with the idea that you're building a business for tomorrow too, not just for today, and that'll end, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I do try to, and I don't do a great job at it, but I do try to have some sort of mile markers or metrics that I measure, kind of success by. Um, you know, I think it's important to know where you are first if you're starting out. Like, what do you have available to you? I have these conversations all the time with friends who are kind of just like starting out, and they're like, well, I want to start a e-commerce business. Like, Nico, what do I do? And I'm like, okay, well, what do you do for work? Oh, okay, I work at this, dental clinic, and I'm this, that, and the third. Okay, what can you do there to grow your income? Because that is a more guaranteed thing, where business is not. Business is a risk.
Mm.
And oftentimes it's the case where even as a creative, right? Like, because we're so passionate about that thing, we think it's the most viable thing to pursue right then and there, when in reality, like, for 90% of the population, they could have a suitable, stable career job that gives them enough autonomy so that they can go back to, their home, and or even, like you said, work from home, which is what I was doing before jumping into full-time creative entrepreneurship, and having a structured day plan where it's like, all right, I can knock out my work between these times during my lunch break, I'll work on this. And then after work, I'll spend an hour and a half doing this. And you have the peace of mind financially so that you can kind of pursue the thing that you want to pursue, knowing that like there doesn't need to be any immediate income coming from your creative endeavors, right? And so I think looking at where you are, like, if I've never sold a record, what makes me think that I'll have a record that will sell tomorrow?
Absolutely.
Right? Just create the record.
Mm.
And then you find that, like, okay, well, I can aggregate like 100 streams a month. So that means that I can do at a minimum 100 streams next month. How can I double that?
Mm.
Like, and then do that. And so I think it's just so much a matter of like building it brick by brick and looking at what's the next move, as opposed to like what we were going about by earlier, which was like, how can I, hit like a breaking every milestone that I've ever hit record, because that may not necessarily be the case every time, or for any creative endeavor, right? So what's your baseline? What can you do to at least meet that? and try to shoot for something above that every single time. Not what's your biggest milestone and try to hit that every time, because then you'll find that you get discouraged every single time.
It seems so often that people they set themselves that unrealistic goal that they've never achieved before or even close to. So like, you see this every January, New Year's resolutions where people are like, let's speak about beat makers or musicians in general. They'll be like, okay, so as of normally the first of the month, I'm going to finish, X amount of songs. I'm going to release X amount of songs. I'm going to make sure that I'm making this many new beats per month. But I'm also going to take on this new instrument, whether it be singing lessons, piano lessons, drum lessons, whatever. And I also have like one-to-one clients, every week of every month. And so many people have similar goals in terms of they're so far-fetched. And I have to ask them, like, which of these things are you nearing on now? And it's almost none of them. They're already not finishing one song a week, but they've put, I'm going to finish 2 songs a week. And it's like, well, why don't you just aim for, I'm going to finish a song every 2 weeks? How many songs are you putting out right now? How many songs are you actually releasing? Are you putting out one a month? And they're like, no, the last song that I put out was actually 6 months ago. And it's like, so why do you think that you're going to be able to put it? You have to have some realistic expectations of the goals to then create these milestones of like, okay, can I just improve 5 to 10%? And can I build on that a little bit? So with that being said, when things aren't going right, how do you know if and when it's time to jump ship?
Yeah, I mean, music is a great example. So I knew that for me at that time to replace my full-time income, and again, this was like 5 years ago, I would have had to make $3,000 a month at a minimum to replace my full-time income after taxes and benefits and all that stuff was taken out. When I wasn't anywhere near breaking that a month, I realized that I'm just dealing with a hobby, right? And so either I don't know enough about the music business to make that a reality, so I'd have to like really go down that path, or I'd have to pivot altogether. And so I took a look at the framework of like, okay, what is it required to actually be a full-fledged musicpreneur? And so I realized I would probably need a lot more upfront capital to market my music. And I mean, you're dealing with a commodity, right? Like music is in abundance. You can go on your Spotify today and listen to millions and millions of songs. So what would make a listener listen to my song over anybody else's song? It would have to be exceptionally produced. The marketing would have to be appealing enough for people to be brought in. I would have to produce, millions of streams a month. Like collaborate. So the intensity of the work that I needed to do in order to get such a what I would consider a minimal return based off like the margins would be very slim, did not make sense for me in my current life circumstances. And so I effectively, I knew that in order for me to make $3,000 a month, I could do that since I had already had a proven concept with my marketing company, that I could do that much easier with 1 or 2 clients than I could, with music, where I had to have like tens of thousands of listeners, right? So it's easier to convince 1 or 2 people than it is to convince 10 to 20,000 people to listen to your song for 0.003 cents per stream. And that's if they listen all the way through for it to count, right? So that to me was like, okay, once I was in a place, so I'd gone to therapy, going back to kind of like my story interwoven there. Why did I make music? Why did I keep holding on to this hope? A lot of it came from validation, wanting to be accepted, validated, liked. Perhaps I was struggling with my inner confidence, so that gave me confidence externally. So I had to work through all that stuff, and then realize with clarity and purpose that for me to make it a reality, it was just I was going. It was like an uphill battle, right? And not to say that you should quit when things are hard, but also to know to pivot when things are better for your particular skills and what you're good at. And I was good at marketing. I was good at videography. I knew that I could get clients fairly easily, going back to the MySpace days of like making people's MySpaces. Like I had a few friends that had hired me for work, and I mean, I was making anywhere between 150 to all the way up to $500 an hour with my media and marketing services, and I was barely scratching, the surface with. I mean, my DistroKid account, you can look it up right now. I think I have like $3,000 of lifetime earnings with, and that's with over, gosh, man, like I was on DistroKid back in 2017. So 7 years worth of, royalties that have been collected on DistroKid, right? Um, so yeah, so for me, it was just understanding kind of the frameworks of like, if I hit this, and this, then it's a viable business. Otherwise, it's just a passion project that I'm spending a lot more time than I need to into it. And it's a hobby, which is fine. If music is a hobby, it's an expensive hobby, but you can make it that, and that's okay. But for it to be a business where you can actually live off of, you have to really understand your numbers and understand what you need to survive and how to create a future proof business at that, so that you can continue to grow and scale as your own personal needs scale, and ideally as you start to bring in other people in, so that you could kind of really make this a long term thing and not just like a short term, windfall.
Okay, so let me ask maybe a slightly selfish question, but I think listeners will get a little bit from this as well, because I think you're a pro in this department. You said spending more time than I need to on probably something that's a passion project. This is going to lead to something that I struggle with, which is delegation. What is or how important is delegation to you within work? It's something where I struggle with the idea of having to let something go, because I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, right? I don't want somebody to do it differently to how I would, even though they might do it much better and much quicker. It's going to free up so much time. Time is money. Where does delegation come into your role, and how important is it?
I think that, for the most part, any effective creative has that tendency to be a perfectionist, but the reality is that perfection is subjective to them, meaning that like you like things done the way that you do them. It's not like an objective thing where everybody thinks like that is the top notch, top tier product that can ever be produced, right? And so like, I've had multiple conversations with people like that, and I've been like that too. There has to be kind of this emotional detachment from the end product, because at the end of the day, the product is meant to service your customers, so that it's a tool that will lead to the transformation that they want. They want the transformation and the benefits of the transformation more than they want the tool in and of itself. Like if my iPhone did not allow me to tap into like my checking, savings, all my investment apps, my social media and all that stuff, it's just a square or a rectangle, right? Uh, the product in and of itself is only beneficial because of the benefits that I get. No, I mean not to sound uh, um, what's the word I'm looking for? Not to overdo it. Beneficial because of the benefits is kind of a redundant statement, but that's what it is. So for you or for anyone in that matter, it's like, well, what are the benefits that people are getting from your product? If the benefit is looking at high top tier editing, and like you are really like such a master editor that like that's the benefit that they're getting and they're becoming better editors because of that, then like focus on delegating other lower level tasks, like maybe answering your email, or creating a schedule, or delivering other lower level assets. Like start to delegate the things that maybe you aren't so that aren't so particular to the skill sets that you have. Like a surgeon, for example, like they'll delegate other aspects of the surgery to like a nurse, a nurse or a nurse practitioner or what have you, but they'll go in there and do the actual surgery. But if they were doing everything, the surgery would be botched, right? Because they wouldn't be focusing on the thing that they have the highest value in. So I think start there is delegating the things that perhaps have the least quote unquote value in the sense of like what you bring to the table. And then once you find out those items, then you can free up yourself for more of the higher value stuff. The things that you're best at, not necessarily the things that you have more of an emotional attachment to. And you'll find that that's where you can thrive. And then eventually you will find someone who does that thing as good, if not better than you. And then you can eventually delegate that one thing so that you can kind of be the producer or the orchestrator, the one conducting the symphony, so to speak, even though you're not actually playing any of the instruments anymore.
Terrific. And how about so you get through delegation, you're starting to build a team. You're still someone who is such a hard worker and dedicates a lot of their time, maybe too much time, to their craft. And I'm not just speaking to you, Nico, but like, to the listener that might find themselves in this position. How about detaching yourself from work as a creative person? Are you quite diligent with that? How do you go about finding your time for unwinding?
We all have a need for leisure. It's funny because I'm still, going to therapy, and my therapist is asking me like, what do you do for leisure? And I'm like, gosh, I don't know. Like, I actually don't know.
I'm going through that right now.
Yeah. And for me, like, kind of one of my bad habits to disconnect with kind of just the overworked brain that I have, and kind of just the tendency to continuously think, was to drink, and not excessively to the point that I'm an alcoholic by, scientific terms, but like binge drinking is definitely a thing that's probably under scored or underemphasized anywhere. And it's like such a bad thing for your health long term, that most of us creatives can dabble in like substance abuse and substance use that is detrimental to our long-term health. And so for me, it was alcohol. And so I would, like, on the weekends, just have like 5, 6, 7, 8 drinks, because that would quiet my mind and just relax me. But the downside to doing leisure that way is that with alcohol, it temporarily like suspends the receptors that allow for stress to come through. But then once the stress is able to come back, it comes back it's like compounded. 2 or 3 or 4 times, the amount. And so you end up having higher anxiety, higher, depression, and all that stuff. So I found myself having anxiety attacks because of that. So now what I'm trying to do is trying to find things. So one thing is I practically quit drinking last year, and then kind of into this year, I've had like a couple instances where I've had a couple drinks, but not more than I can count on my hand here for this year. But like, for me, I'm trying to find that leisure time and trying to add it to my weekly schedule, so that I don't get to the place of burnout creatively, and more importantly, obviously, like, psychologically. And I realize that the mind needs quiet, the mind needs playtime, aka recreation, so that it can creatively work again. And when we don't give ourselves that, then we're just probably producing a shitty product, at the end of the day. So
absolutely, we'll have to hold ourselves accountable in our search for hobbies. I'm in a place right now where, same question. People have asked me, like, what do you do when you're not, it seems like you're putting out content all the time, putting out tracks, you're doing this, you're running these different kind of facets of a music business. What do you do in the downtime? And I'm like, I don't even know. There was a long period of time when we first met, I didn't have a TV, I didn't have a games console, I didn't have anything that wasn't related to music. I've spoken about this before. It was music books, music films, documentaries, if I wanted downtime, and then everything else was me doing something actively within the music industry. And it just led to higher burnout, or quicker burnout, and higher levels of anxiety, depression, and stress. And I find that I do everything in excess. I have an extremely high, what do they call that? Addictive personality. So I've also got to be careful when I find that hobby as well, because I throw absolutely everything into that. Me and my buddy have just started dabbling in golf. I'm the worst golfer you've ever seen.
Nice.
But it's something that I found really fun. And immediately I caught myself. I was coming home from a morning at the range. I haven't even gone to a golf course yet. I'm still at the range. And I came home from the golf range, and then I'm online looking at YouTube tutorials on how to better that thing. I'm practicing in the garden, in the living room. I'm perfecting my swing. I'm still just as bad. And I noticed a correlation between, it was like I recognized myself from a younger age, where I was like, oh, this is what I did with drums when I was about 9 years old. I threw everything into drums, like all hours of the day. And I was like, I can't do this with a hobby. It has to be an hour, and then you've enjoyed that thing, and now go do the other thing. It's like a delayed gratification where I'm like, okay, cool, you've worked hard, you go do that thing, you do something that quiets the mind, and you don't have to be perfect at it. You can just enjoy it,
Mm-hmm.
and then you can move away, and you can do a few of those things as well. Because I found that with a hobby, I was like, well, now I need a hobby that defines me as much as music. Like, I'm going to be
Right.
the musician that plays golf, or the musician that plays basketball, or and I was like, okay, you can just have a few hobbies that you're not necessarily good at, that you enjoy, and that you follow. If it is sport, that you follow kind of loosely. You don't need to know every character in the sport. So yeah, we'll revisit that one, buddy, and we'll come back and hold each other accountable. We've had
Yeah.
some lowlights, and you've had many highlights. Now on in May in 2024, what does life look like for Nico Santana?
I am building a business. So I was previously in my career, I went from internal business consultant to software engineer. So just dabbling in all sorts of different things. Effectively, what I was trying to do was build my skill set and my own personal development to the place where I could um, uh, either drive the revenue of the company that I was at, because I knew that effectively, like that's where I thrive is kind of that creative and business component, and so I was trying to find that in my prior company, but I just kept hitting a brick wall with it, and I got an opportunity to partner with a former CEO of a nine-figure company here in Florida to just build out his channels and build out his educational platforms and kind of create this e-learning slash tech solutions business with him and alongside him. So it's been really fun working. It's been super challenging. Definitely a lot of things that I didn't know, and I'm kind of just paying down as guy that I listen to, Alex Hermosi, says, paying down my ignorance debt and trying to pay it as soon as possible, as fast as and quickly as possible, while building this business. So, um, our goals are pretty grand with this business. I mean, he's built nine-figure businesses in the past. What's to say that this can't be another nine-figure business? But more importantly, more than that, I find the work rewarding in my personal life. I can still be creative. It's helped me shape the person that I am, becoming a better husband, becoming a better father. And I think that really is kind of a thing that I want to leave the audience with is something that my mentor Dave, tells me. It's not so much what you do, but who you become in the process that matters. And that's really resonated with me because it's like at the end of the day, you could be, working at service-based job at a restaurant for the rest of your life and really thrive in that and have a simple life and be a great person. And that's good. That's okay. Like so much of culture today is how big, grand, and wonderful you can make things. And maybe you are called to that. And don't shun anyone who does do that. But also too, don't feel bad if you feel like your life is supposed to be simpler and not as grand or astute, so to speak. It's okay. Do what you're called to do. Be who you're called to be. It's okay to be you. And there's no one else like you in the world, so be the best you possible.
What a perfect message to end on. Nico, thank you so much for sitting down with me today. And hopefully I'll catch you again on the podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Will. I appreciate it, man.
All the best.